Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Eddie Jennings from EJSLLC.com. This video is going to be another in my series of RHCSA exam practice sessions, and we're going to be looking at the objective use looping constructs for and etc. to process file and command line input. I want to remind you that these sessions are not necessarily designed to be authoritative in nature as far as the information, but I do try to make the information accurate, but rather it's kind of an example of if you're faced with a couple of situations on the exam where you're having to make scripts that include some type of loop, how you might handle that on the exam. Before I dive in, I want to thank returning subscribers as well as invite everyone, if you enjoy the content of the video, make sure you click like. Don't hesitate to leave comments and questions. I'll respond to them as I both have time and am able. And then also for folks that have not subscribed to the channel, make sure you click that subscribe button and ring the bell so you can be notified of when new content comes available. And without further ado, we'll jump into doing looping within bash scripts. Automating repetitive tasks is one of the big reasons why we do scripting. And I think it's one of the reasons why this entire block of objectives was added to the RHCSA exam, because any system administrator needs to have at least a basic understanding of scripting, because it can make frankly, your life much easier as a system administrator and makes you potentially much more efficient in the work that you do. And one of the methods of being able to automate or repeat repetitive tasks without you manually having to do something is by using looping within scripts. And a loop does exactly what you would think. It continuously does whatever you want until you tell it to stop, or until it runs into some condition that says when this condition is true to stop doing what you're doing. I'll give you an example of that here on the command line with the while keyword. Just like in an if statement, a while keyword is looking for a particular exit code. And while the exit code of whatever it's checking, whatever test that you've given it, is 0, that's going to evaluate to true, and the script block for the while loop is going to execute. And it'll continue doing that until the test no longer returns an exit code of 0 or true. Likewise, if the exit code returns as false or 1 or something that's not 0, then the while loop is going to stop. It won't execute anymore. So let's do a quick little example of this. Actually, what I'll do, rather than doing it in the command line, I'll do it within the little script itself. So we'll do bin bash, and our little script is going to be while true, do, which is the beginning of your script block of whatever it is you're wanting the loop to do. Echo this is true, and then we end it with done. All right, and we're going to save this. I'm actually going to save it in the temp directory. So we'll call it while test.sh. And let's go into the temp directory, and we will change mode. All right, so, and by the way, if I just do the command true there, and then if I were to echo the exit code, let's try that again. It's going to return a 0. Likewise, false will return, did it again. We'll return a 1. So while true, do the thing. So let's put this to the test. And this will just go on forever. And the reason this is going to go on forever is because the only thing that we're feeding while is something that will return an exit code of 0. So therefore it's always going to be true. It's never not going to be true. So it'll go forever. If I were to change this to while false, we'll save that. And if I were to run the script again, nothing happens, because the very first time while checks, the return code that's given is not a 0, so therefore it evaluates to false, and so it's not going to do the script at all. One of the most common examples that you'll see of this is doing the little counter script. Not counter as in against, but counter as in counting. So if I go back to my script here and we do a variable called counter, let's set it equal to 1. And then this time we'll do a test, just like we do with the if statement. And we're going to say counter is less than 10. So while that condition evaluates as true, do echo this is true. Actually, we'll do this. We'll do the counter is counter. And then what we're going to do is increment counter, because if we don't do that, then we've set counter to 1. While is going to check whether or not counter is less than 10, which is going to be true for right now. And it'll do its loop. Well, once it finishes the loop, it's going to run the test again. And unless we're changing the value of counter, it's always going to be less than 10. So we're going to be in that infinite loop just like we were before. So we need to increment counter. There are a number of ways of doing this. We can use the let command. We can do something like counter equals expression counter plus 1, something like that. I'm going to use double parentheses to do an arithmetic expression. And I'm going to simply have counter plus plus. And what that's going to do is increment whatever the value of counter is by 1. So let's save this and let's put it to the test. And there is our counter. The first value is 1. It checked that. Is 1 less than 10? It is. Echo the line where the counter is the value of counter, and then we increment it. And so the very first time we go through the loop, it's going to be a 1. Then when it gets to this point, it's going to increment by 1 up to 2. It's going to check again. The counter is now 2, increments, checks again, 3, all the way up to when we get to number 9, right? It checks, it's true, therefore the counter is 9, and then it increments. Now counter is equal to 10, and this time this is no longer true, therefore we break out of the while loop, and so you only have 9 for that. Another keyword that you can use is the until keyword. So what we're going to do is until, we'll keep using counter. This time I'm going to do it without quotation marks. Let's see what happens. I don't believe I need the quotation marks since we're dealing with a number. I may be wrong with that. If I am, feel free to put that in the comments. So until counter equals 0, we are going to do echo the counter is counter, and we're going to decrement counter by 1. That's what the minus minus operator does. Done's. So this loop is going to happen. It's going to check to see if counter is equal to 0, and it's not going to be. And so until this is true, keep doing this thing, right? So let's save and put it to the test. And there we go. Our counter goes up to 10, because remember, once we get to number 9, this breaks out of the loop. So counter is equal to 10. Therefore, counter equal to 0 is going to evaluate to false right now. And so until this evaluates to true, we're going to go through this loop, which is decreasing the value. We get to counter is 1, checks again, it's not equal to 0. Do this, counter becomes 0, checks is it equal to 0, it is, and we break out of the loop. So there are other uses of while and until other than the counter example, but probably if you look at other tutorials, you're going to find that the counter example is one of the most common ones, is one of the easier ones to see. Another loop that we can work with is something called a for loop. Now I saved it for last because there's a couple of things with this, and this gets into the other part of the objective as far as process file and command line input. You can do this with while and until as well, but for is a little special. And what for is going to be doing is looping through a list of things. So let's do this just on the command line here. And we're going to do for I. I is a very common variable that you'll see. You can have this be whatever variable you want, but just if you're looking at tutorials and such, you'll often see them using the variable I. And we have for I in some type of list. And this list is going to be, for right now, space delimited. So let's do red, white, blue. So for I in, actually I'm going to do this in quote, well, I don't necessarily have to do it in quotation marks, I don't think. Let's find out. After all, this is your practice session, and one of the, if you've watched any of my other videos, you'll commonly hear me say one of the best ways to practice is just try stuff and see if it breaks, and if it breaks, figure out why, and from that you get some learning. So for I in this space delimited list, since we're doing this as one-liners, we're going to do semicolon, do, and we're just going to echo the value of I. Then semicolon, done. And there's red, white, blue. So what it did was set the variable I to the value of whatever is in the list. And so for each of the items, so the first time through the for loop, it sets I to red. Second time through the for loop, it sets I to white. So third time through the for loop, sets I to blue. Echo I, and then you're done. So seeing this in an actual file, let's see, we'll keep our bin bash. Let's see, actually we'll write that same loop again, just so you can see how this would look. So for I in red, white, blue, do, echo I, done. I'm actually going to save this as something else. I'm going to call it for test.sh. Come back to my terminal, if I can get my terminal. Make for test executable. And there is our loop written in a form that is not just the one-liner here, but is doing the same thing for the space delimited list, echo whatever that is. So as promised, I want to give you a real-world example of what for can do for you as far as a script that you might use in your actual production environment. And I would imagine that whatever task that you have to do on the RHCSA exam is probably going to be something that's applicable to actually doing stuff versus just, make a counter loop through its values with while or until. But there's no way to know because it doesn't specify in the objective specifically what you have to do with this this loop. So with this for loop, I've went ahead and made a little file here, and this file is testusers.csv. And we're going to be using this to actually make these users on the system using a for loop. So I'm going to go ahead and sudo into root, because I know I'm going to have that for making these users. Oh, I got the password the first time. Means it's going to be a good video, right? So we're going to change our script just a bit, and rather than for I in red, white, and blue, we're going to use a subshell, and we're going to cat tmp test users CSV. So that's one thing to remember about a for loop. You do not have to explicitly type out that space delimited list. You can use really the output of any command potentially to feed that into a for loop. We'll keep the echo I just to echo out what the output's going to be. And let's save and see what happens. Oh, I need to go to the TMP directory. And it does exactly what you would expect. It's going to give us this output. Now, the reason why this all came out as individual lines is the space delimiter that's currently being used includes, or rather, what would count as a space is what you would think, pressing the space bar, or new line would also count as a space. So we don't need to change the delimiter yet. Before the end, we'll alter this just a bit, and we'll see why we would need to possibly change the delimiter type. So what we're going to do now is use this data to be able to make our new users. So within our for loop, what we're going to do is set a couple of variables. The first variable I'm going to set is something called new user. And we're going to set this, use a subshell. We're going to echo I. And we're going to pipe that to cut delimiter as a comma and the first field. So again, when you're working with a script, have your terminal window handy so you can test this. So right now, I would be equal to one of these lines. And if I were to, let's just make up a variable foo, and we're going to set foo to be what the value of I would be for the first iteration. And if I were to echo foo, we get that like we expect. And if I wanted just the first field of this CSV list, cut -D for delimiter, field 1, and that's going to yield me just the username. Likewise, for the password piece, I'm going to just call this new pass. We'll do the same thing. Except we want the second field for the password. So if we go back to our little test example here and I do F2, then that will give us the monkey123 part. And then we would have user add, and the username is going to be new user. And then passwd has a option called --std standard in stdin. And what that tells passwd is to expect the password from standard input, which can come from a pipe. So the way we're going to be setting the password is we're going to echo new pass, pipe that to passwd for the new user. And that stdin is going to tell passwd to look for the password to come from standard input, which it's getting via the pipeline. And then that's it. Now, what you may want to do in your script, if you were actually doing this in production, you might want to add some echo statements saying, we're now making this user and all that. You might want to add some checking to make sure that the script's running as root, because otherwise user add and passwd aren't going to work the way that you want. But for this particular example, we're just going to show in the power of the for loop here, and let's see what happens. Now, on the actual exam, while I'm thinking about this, so what you may want to do is do what I did before, and that's echo the output out first, just as a quick test, especially if you're doing something like making a user and something that has to do a significant system change, right? But otherwise, we'll live on the wild side here and test in production, right? So here we go. Let's see what happens. All right, looks like it's... So of course, this changing password for whatever is the output of passwd, and it looks like the passwd piece worked, which you can fairly well assume that the user add part worked. Otherwise, passwd would have been complaining that new user didn't exist. So test results, we'll go back to our non-root account, su-l, we'll do test user 1. And I know that test user 1's password was monkey123. And it worked. So our script did what we wanted. It took the values of what was in that CSV file and it looped through them, making a new user and setting the password for each of those users. So that last thing I wanted to show you as far as space delimiting. Let's say we have a CSV file. Actually, we'll go back to our other CSV file. We'll make a new one. So we're going to call this test names.csv. And I'm going to put a couple of names here. We'll start with mine. And I'll put the my current location, Georgia. And let's do Bill Gates. I assume he's in Washington. I'm not sure where he lives, but I know that, Redmond, Washington for Microsoft. Let's see, Linus Torvalds, and we're going to say Torvalds. We're going to say unknown. Let's say we don't know where Linus is. All right, and there we go. Spell that correctly. So if I were to cat this, testnames.csv, we have this. So we're going to make a change this back to just echoing what I is going to give us. And test names. So let's see what happens. Clear the screen. Oh, go back. Oh, I see. I need to go into the temp directory, so I'm as that other user. I see what I did wrong. Beauty of live video, right? I may or may not edit that out, because I try to make these practice sessions be, kind of true to form what you'd be doing on the exam. Let's go back to our home directory. Where did I save that file? All right, when in doubt, I think I know what I did. Let's do this. So we'll find name. That didn't help out too much. It's probably going to be somewhere in home. So let's try use sudo for this. All right, so it's in test user 1. So we'll su back. We'll just use sudo to copy that. We'll copy it to the TMP directory. I misspell the name. Test user 1. This is odd. All right, so. Oh. Some of you watching the video are probably cringing right now. You call this a practice session, you're making mistakes right and left. All right, there we go. Maybe use an actual command and that'll work now. So we'll go back to the temp directory. Looks like all of our files are there. And now let's try the for test again. All right, and so notice what's happened here. We don't have the nice lines like we had with the making of user examples. Instead, at every space, which would be a space as well as a new line, it has delimited each of the items in the for list. So what we would have to do in this situation is change what for is using to figure out where the next list member is. And the variable for that is something called IFS, which is the internal field separator. And so by default, IFS is set to I think space, new line, and maybe something else, or it might just be space. I can't remember. But what we're going to do is change that value. One thing that I would encourage you to do, even though this should just stay within the scope of the script that's launching, is if you're making an environment variable change, you want to try to preserve that. So I'm going to make a variable called old IFS. And I'm going to set that to the value of IFS. Now I'm going to set IFS to new line. Now, the reason why I'm having to do this $ here is without that, this would just be interpreted as escaped character in. So for new line, you have to do this particular syntax. Then at the very end, what we're going to do is reset what the IFS is. So let's try our for test again. And now we have what we would expect to see, which is each line of that CSV file, because we've told for, or rather, we have told bash that the internal field separator is new line, but the end effect is for is going to group everything that is in a line together as one item of the list. So I know this was a lot of examples and such, and frankly, a good number of mistakes as well. But in your actual exam situation, when you're under some kind of pressure, you might make some of these mistakes. You might make a file that you're wanting to use as far as whatever your objective is that's having you write a script, and you lose it and you can't remember where it is. Well, you saw a rather clunky way of figuring it out, so hopefully that'll help you on the exam as well. But regardless of the errors, this learning to use looping constructs would be useful for you even outside of the exam situation. It'll be useful for you just in your system administration duties and such. As always, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch. If you did enjoy the content of the video, make sure you click like. Also, feel free to leave a comment. In particular, if you want to laugh at my mistakes, leave comments about that. It'll probably give me a chuckle as well. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, make sure you click that subscribe button and ring the bell when you do. Thank you again for taking the time to watch, and I'll see you the next time.